Now we are going to introduce internationalization in our application. And for this one, we are going to use a library, this React-i18 next library. Let's install this one. Now, since we are going to install a new dependency, let's make sure we stop both the test console and also let's stop the application. Now let's install the dependencies, just copying this one. So it is basically installing two packages. One of them is the React i18 next and the other one is the i18 next. Just pasting here. The package is installed. Let's run the application. Let's also run the tests. And let's show browser. Nothing has changed yet. We just have dependency, but we are not using it in our application yet. For now, let's practice this library. The things we are going to do will break our test, but we will fix it. So just changing the size of this browser. Now let's use the library in index.js. And let's use the sample here in this documentation of this library. Right here, there is a basic sample, which is this part. So just copying the imports for the i18n and this i18n configuration part. So in index.js, pasting this one. This is not something we use in this index part yet. So basically we are just importing this i18n and this init React i18n and next functionality. Then we are configuring this i18n to use this one. Then here we are initializing it with resources. And in resources, we have the languages we are supporting. And in this one, we have this English and corresponding translations right here. So for our application, this is going to be something like this. So this is a JSON, and we have this key and values. We are going to use the key in our components, and the translation library will be showing corresponding translation, corresponding value for that key to achieve this translation functionality. So if you change the language, we will have different value for that same key, and that's how we are doing the translation. So we will have a key of, let's say, sign up, and the text will be sign up. All are having the uppercase. Now this is the configuration for the language selection, and let's go with the English. By the way, just clearing the comments. And there is a fallback language configuration. If the language does not match anything we defined in this resources, then it's going to be using English. And there is this configuration. By the way, this I'm not going to go much more into detail about this library. We will be just checking what we need as we use this library. So this course is not about this library. So saving this one. So we have this configuration now, and we are going to use this i18n functionality in sign up page. To access to the functionalities coming with this library, we have two options. We will see both of them, but let's go with the first one. We are going to import a function from this library, React i18 next, and that is with translation. And this function is called as higher order component. And we use higher order components in React components to enhance that component's functionality. So we have this sign up page component and we are exporting that one, but the sign up page is defined right here. But here we can extend this one with this higher order component, and we can do like this. We call with translation. This is a function, and this function is returning a function back, and that returned function is taking the parameter, the component. So we pass sign up page to it, and as a result this is creating a new function. Let's say this is a sign up page with translation, and instead of exporting the sign up page, the class itself, let's export this newly created one. So let's save this one. Again, from our application point of view, we don't see any difference, but if we open the developer tools, let's go to components, and here in this tree we have this app, and we have this sign up page with i18n next translation, and then we have another sign up page. So we have two sign up pages, and one of them, this one, is the actual page we have here, this class itself. But the second one we see here is the one created with the with translation higher order component. So let's open the app too. So in app we are importing sign up page from this module, sign up page module, but we are importing the default export. So we are importing this thing, and this is sign up page wrapped with this with translation functionality. So in 3 we see app, and there is this sign up page with translation and this sign up page, and here we can see the state of our component, but this one does not have any state in it. But there's a difference. This higher order component is passing props to our actual component. Here in the props section we see this i18n and this t. These are coming from this newly created component. So basically higher order component is passing props to our component. Now we are going to use these props, this t, for translation. Let's try this one. Now we will be translating this text. Previously we have seen, let's open the input. We have seen how we can access to the props from a component. In functional components like this one, the prop is just the parameter of this function is taking. In class components we can access to props like this one, this props. So with this way we will be accessing to the props, and in this props we have t, and we have seen there is i18n. So now we are going to use, let's use object structuring. We will be taking t from this props, and this is the translation function, and we will be translating this text. So we will be having an expression here, opening curly braces, and calling t. This is a function, and as a parameter we are passing the key we are looking for. So we are looking for sign up, like this, sign up in camel case. So if we save at this point, we don't see any change in our application. Now let's add another language, and I will be adding my language. So just copying this en and pasting here. So in resources we have this en, and I'm adding my language TR, Turkish, and now I'm updating this sign up, and it's going to be this one in my language. And let's change the language to TR. Let's see what's going to happen. Let's refresh this, and here we are seeing the sign up is shown in this language. By the way, this implementation is breaking our tests, but we will get to it. But before going any further, let's add the translations for each of these label text, and we are also having this same text for the sign up in the bottom. So let's add username, and this is going to be username. Email is going to be email. Password will be password, and password repeat, password repeat, and adding same keys to the other languages. And we are going to use the translation for each of these fields. So this input will have this label, and let's use translation T, and this is username, and we will have translation for email, password, and the last one is right here, password repeat. So we are using the keys we set in the resources. Let's make sure we have the translation for this sign up text in button. So having an expression and T sign up. So saving this one and refreshing the page. Here we are seeing the content is in this language, and if we toggle back to, if you go back to en, and if we refresh this one, here we can see all texts are shown in this language. Now let's fix our tests. Now in our application we are using a library, but our test modules does not know anything about it. So let's do like this. Let's extract this i18n part from this index.js. Let's cut this one, and let's create a new folder in the source, and let's call this one as locale, and let's add JavaScript file i18n.js, and pasting this one, the one I cut from index, to here, and let's make sure this module is exporting this newly modified i18n. So export default i18n. Now we are going to import this one here in the index.js. So let's import. We will just import the module, going to locale, and under that one we have this i18n module, and we will be also using this one, this module, in our tests. So we will be having, let's do it right here in pages, sign up page. Let's get import from, going one directory up, under locale we have i18n. Now let's save this one, and here we can see the tests are passing now. We will be adding language selection on our page, but before that let's do this change in the code. Let's extract these translations as a JSON files. So let's create a new file under this locale folder. This is en.json, and just cutting this object for the translation and pasting here, and we will be importing en from en.json. Basically we are importing this en.json as an object as called as en, and let's assign it here, and let's do the same thing for the other language, just cutting this one. So we will have a file which will be imported as tr from this tr.json. So we will have tr.json here, and it will have this content in it. Saving all these changes. So we extracted the objects as a separate files. Now we have internationalization in our application, and now let's allow user to change the language while using the application. So let's start with the test. Now we will be adding new test suite, just collapsing these two, layout and interactions, and now we are adding a new suite, and this is for internationalization. And our first test is to be checking these text to be in English. So it initially displays all text in English. In this one we will be rendering sign up page, and all we will do is just query the elements. We already have done this in the layout tests, but to have this suite specific tests, let's repeat the steps. So we expect the screen get by role. We will be looking for heading and the text in the heading will be sign up, and this is going to be in the document. And similarly we will be querying button. We have header and button having the same text, and we will check screen get by labeled text username to be in the document, and doing the same thing for email, password and password repeat. So we know these are passing, but let's save this anyway. And the test is passing. We will be adding the test for the other languages, but before doing that, let's refactor this one. Let's use the en JSON in our test, and instead of using directly the text we have here, let's use the JSON keys. So let's import en from locale en JSON, and here we will get en sign up, and same thing for this one, and this is en username, en email, en password and en password repeat. So nothing is changed, the tests are still passing. We just use the values we are taking from this JSON. Now let's add our next test, and it's about changing the language, and in this one it displays all text in Turkish after changing the language. Now in this one we will be importing the tr JSON Turkish version of the keys and values, and we will be replacing these with the tr sign up, tr username, tr email, tr password and tr password repeat. But this test is not ready yet. We are rendering the component, and we did nothing about language selection. So first we need an element on this page that we can interact, which will be changing the language. So let's do something like this. We will have an element having a title, and let's query it like this: screen get by title. Title is an attribute for HTML element, and it doesn't matter which kind of HTML element we are using. It could be span, it could be image, or anything else. So instead of relying on what the actual element is, let's depend on to the title attribute of that element. So we will be querying the element based on title, and the title will be this one. This is Turkish in Turkish. So let's say this is Turkish toggle, and we are going to click to this one. This can be button too, so we will be just clicking to it, Turkish toggle, and after we click this one, we expect all text on this page to be visible in this language. So saving this. So this one is failing because we don't have the queried elements on this page yet. These are not there. We don't have any Turkish text visible. Let's fix this. Let's add a new section right here. Just before closing the div, let's add a new element. Let's use span, and let's set the title, and the title is this one, and in it we will have this text. Now we are going to click this one, so let's make sure we set onClick attribute. Now when we click to this one, we are going to change the language, and we can change the language with the props being passed to our component with translation. And let's check the DevTools once again. Here, sign up page is receiving this prop T, and also it receives this i18n. This is another prop being passed by the library, and it has the functions like changing the language. So we will be using this one to change the language. So we are going to create a function. So let's say onClick Turkish, and after this is clicked, we can access to this props i18n, and it has change language function. We call this change language, and we pass the language. So here in i18n module, we have two languages, en and tr. So to change the language, we will just pass the tr to this one, and we will be calling this onClick Turkish. Let's save this one. Now the tests are passing, and we can test this one on browser as well. Here we have this tr. Let's click this one, and here we can see texts are changed to this language. By the way, in React, when we are assigning a function to a property like this one onClick, we don't have to create function like this. We can create function inline right here. So we can have an arrow function here, and we can just call this props i18n change language, and we can pass the tr to it. So this would also work. Now let's also add a language selection for the English. Currently we only have this tr, so if we change it to tr, then there is no option to go back to English. So let's make sure we have that one too. So in sign up test, let's add a new one, just copying the Turkish one and pasting this one. It displays all text in English after changing back from Turkish. Now we are switching to Turkish. Then we will have, similarly, we will have an element having title of English, and let's say this is English toggle, and we will be clicking this one, and in the end we are going to query the elements based on the en version of our keys. So en sign up, en username, en password repeats, and so on. Saving this one. So this is failing. Let's fix it. Just like having this span for the Turkish, let's add another span. And this is for English, and when we click to this one, it's going to be changing the language to en, and let's have this en right here. By the way, we don't need this function anymore, so just removing that one. And let's save this. And the tests are passing, and here we don't have any spacing between these two spans, so it is just written like this. But let's click to en. Here the texts are translated to English version, and if we click the tr, the texts are in Turkish. Now let's change the style right here. Let's make this part more meaningful to user by using country flags for the languages. So for this one, we can use a public API like this one, country flags IO. So basically it has the options like having the flat or shiny flags, and the pattern is like this. We will be adding the country code and the style and the size of the flag, and a sample is something like this one. So we will have flags in our page. So we will be replacing the span with img, just copying the sample, and let's change this one to img, and let's close the img. We won't be having a text like tr for the Turkish representation, and we will have source, and the source will be pointing to the tr flag, and let's have a small size of flag like 24. And similarly we will have image for this one for the English, and it will be having the source as this is GB Great Britain. Saving this one. Now the flags are right here. By the way, this is complaining because the images does not have alt attribute. For accessibility, we should be adding alt tag for the images in case these images are not loaded because of some kind of failure in the network. The alt text we are setting right here will be visible. So let's set alt texts, and this is Turkish flag, and the other one is Great Britain flag. Saving this one. And the functionality is right here. We can click the flags and change the language. Now we have these flags in our page, but it is part of this sign up page. Let's extract this part, this imgs, as a separate component. So just cutting this one, and let's create a new component right here under the components folder, and let's call this one as language selector. And let's have a function. Let's make this one a functional component, and basically this is going to be returning an element containing these imgs, and we are going to export default language selector. By the way, we have an error here. React does not allow a component to return multiple root elements. It is looking for a single root element, so we must be wrapping this one something like with a div like this. So it is fine because there is only one root element and others are child of this element. There is also another alternative, and that's called as React Fragment, and it is just like this. We return this opening and closing empty angle brackets like this. So we don't specify any element name here, and this is called as React Fragment. So we need to update this part as well. In sign up page, this part was accessing to the props of the sign up page, and it has this i18n, and it was calling this change language. But now this language selector is a separate component, and it is not taking any prop yet. So we can either use with translation for this one, so that this would be receiving props, and from these props we can access to the i18n change language. So we could be doing something like this. Let's do that. First, let's import. We will be importing from React i18 next, and the function is with translation, and we will be returning with translation, and like this. So this with translation will be passing the props to our component, and in this props we will have this i18n, and we can use i18n to change the language. Now let's use this language selector in sign up page. So first let's import language selector from components language selector, and let's have it right here, language selector. Now let's save these changes. On UI we are still seeing the flags here, so the component is right here and the tests are passing, and also we can verify the component is being used right here. In the components we can see there is the sign up page. In it we have this language selector which is wrapped with the translation higher order component, and here it is receiving corresponding i18n functionality. So we can just change the language by clicking the flags, and it is working. Alternative to this higher order component usage, with React 16.8 there is new functionality introduced, and it is called as hooks. We will be practicing hooks coming with the React, and also we will be practicing the hooks with the libraries we are using. So the usage is like this for this case. Instead of having this with translation, we will be importing the function use translation. And now we are not going to wrap our component with this with translation right here. Now we are going to call this use translation right here, use translation, and this is returning us the translation object, which is basically containing the props we are seeing right here. So it has this i18n and t, so we can use object destructuring to take the i18n from the returned object from this use translation. So basically we can just replace this props with nothing. So we directly call this i18n, this one we are taking from the use translation. We are calling this i18n change language. Now let's save this one. So the tests are passing, and we can verify it on browser as well. Here the languages are properly changed. Now if we check the DevTools once again, here in sign up page we have this language selector, but this is directly the language selector. We don't see it, it is being wrapped with this translation because we are using hooks now. And here in this section, for instance in the sign up page we have this props and state. Now in the language selector, for the language selector we have the props and it doesn't have prop, but here we have this hooks for the hook we are using right here. So we extracted the language selector and all tests are still passing, but instead of using this component right here in the sign up page, let's use it somewhere which will be always visible in the application, and that is the app component. So let's open app and let's import language selector from components language selector, and right after sign up page let's add language selector. And we don't need to import this language selector right here anymore, and let's remove the import too. So saving these changes. Now some of our tests are failing, and those tests are basically the ones dependent onto the elements we are querying. Here we are querying the flags, but now we are just rendering the sign up page, and now the languages are not part of the sign up page. But if you check it on browser right here, we can see the flags right here, and this is properly working. And if we check the components right here in the app, we have the sign up page and language selector. So to fix this, we need to update our tests, and we can import language selector right here. So let's import language selector from going one directory up, components, language selector. We have a typo here, let's fix this. This one must be like this. And basically we are going to render not just the sign up page but also the language selector. So this render will be similar to the current state of the app component. So we do this query, the query of the flag right here in this test and the next one. So we are going to render this one with the language selector, but this part is also looking for a single root element. So again, let's use React Fragment like this. So this is wrapping the sign up page and language selector, and we will be repeating same thing for the next test. And let's save this one. Now the tests are passing. Now let's refactor this part. Let's not repeat ourselves in each test. So let's have a setup right here in this internationalization describe. And let's do this render in this setup. So we will be just calling this setup, and we can use this setup in the first test too, even we don't interact with the language selector. Let's be consistent and use the same setup, and doing the same thing here and doing the same thing in this test too. Now let's save this one. The tests are passing, but we have a hidden problem with our tests. To demonstrate this, let's change the order of our tests. So let's move this one, the initially displays all text in English. Let's move this test after test for changing the language to Turkish. Let's paste it after this one, and let's save it like this. Now we have a failure in our test, and if we check the logs here, let's scroll up here, and here we can see it initially displays all text in English. This test is failing now. And here we have this output on the console. It is showing the last known markup of this page, and here in the output we can see all texts are in Turkish. It's not in English. So we just call setup, but we don't click to anything So we didn't do anything about the language selection, so we are expecting it to be showing English initially. But it's not working like this after changing the order, because the state of the language selection is not reset between tests. We are importing this i18n to apply our i18n configuration in each test, but it is retaining its state throughout the test. So in this test, we are clicking the Turkish, which is setting the language to TR. And after this test finished, nothing is changing that language selection. So when this one is running, the language is still Turkish. So this is rendered in Turkish, and all the buttons or the headers are having Turkish text. Now to fix this one, we are going to use a lifecycle functionality of after each. So after each test, we will be changing language back to English. And for this, we are not just going to import this module, but we are also going to use the instance of the i18n. So let's have it like this, i18n from this one. And here in after each, we are going to call i18n change language to en. So this is just like what we are doing in language selector. When we are clicking to this one, it is changing the language in i18n. And we do the same thing in this test module. So after each test, we are setting the language back to English. Now let's save this one. Now the tests are passing, but we have a warning right here. So the warning is saying an update to this translation component inside the test was not wrapped in act. And it is saying what to do in this case. Basically, after the test, we are changing the language, which is causing the component to re-render. So we must be waiting until that re-render, that update to be completed. And to do that, we call act, and this act is coming from this testing library, act. And we call act, this is a function, and it is taking a callback. And let's change the language in this callback. So saving this one. Now the tests are passing and that warning is gone.